the novelty of my argument is in demonstrating that without U.S. coercive pressure, it's unlikely that Germany would have forever remained a non-nuclear power.
Hi, I'm Sean Lynn-Jones. I edit the quarterly journal International Security that's based at the Belfer Center here at Harvard's Kennedy School. Today I'm talking to Jean Gerzhoy, who's a postdoctoral research fellow here at the Belfer Center. Jean has just published an article in the journal International Security, and it's called Alliance Coercion and Nuclear Restraint: How the United States Thwarted West Germany's Nuclear Ambitions. Jean, can you summarize the basic argument of your article in a nutshell? What do you say?
Absolutely. I argue that security guarantees to keep client states like West Germany from acquiring nuclear weapons have to take on a coercive dimension that previous scholarship hasn't really fully accounted for. And the basic idea is that the patron state, the United States, for example, has to employ a strategy that I call alliance coercion, which consists of conditional threats of military abandonment that are linked to demands for nuclear restraint. And that strategy succeeds when the client state is militarily dependent on the patron, and when the patron promises that its protection, its security guarantees will persist if the client disavows nuclear armament.
And what's novel or different in the way you look at this history?
Many scholars assumed that Germany had voluntarily given up the idea of acquiring nuclear weapons when it joined NATO. In fact, the evidence that I examine shows that even in private conversation, German leaders were adamant that it would be impossible to assume that the country would forever renounce nuclear weapons, and that the country needed to produce nuclear weapons and acquire them in order to safeguard its security. So the novelty of my argument is in demonstrating that without U.S. coercive pressure, it's unlikely that Germany would have forever remained a non-nuclear power.
Well, you said the word forever, and that raises the question: is there any chance that Germany will again seek nuclear weapons?
I think that it would be very unlikely that Germany would seek nuclear weapons again. But even if Germany sought nuclear weapons, because it would still depend on the United States for protection against nuclear threats, the U.S. would maintain substantial coercive leverage over the country and could employ that leverage again to keep the country from acquiring or even from meaningfully pursuing nuclear weapons.
Well, I know your article focuses almost entirely on the West German case, but there's a broader question. Is the strategy, the use of U.S. leverage that you identify as being so important in that case, applicable in other cases?
Certainly. There were two cases at least where the United States deployed explicit threats of military abandonment to keep militarily dependent clients from acquiring nuclear weapons. The first was in South Korea, which sought nuclear weapons during the early and mid-1970s as a way of, once again, guarding against the prospect that the United States might fail to come to its defense. And there is evidence that Henry Kissinger deployed the threat of abrogating the security agreement with South Korea as a means of forcing it to ratify the NPT and give up its nuclear ambitions. And the second instance was with Taiwan, where the U.S. deployed similar threats.
Does the United States, in the post-Cold War era, have more or less leverage over countries that might seek nuclear weapons?
So the end of the Cold War has actually reduced pressure on the United States to remain committed to its allies abroad, because the U.S. no longer has a global rival keeping it committed to its allies. As a result, the U.S. credibility of withdrawing its protection has only gone up since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So the more that allies are capable of defending themselves, the less that U.S. threats of abandonment should affect their security. And so it depends on particular cases whether the United States could employ alliance coercion to keep clients from acquiring nuclear weapons.
Okay, let's talk about those cases then. Which U.S. allies are most likely to seek nuclear weapons?
I think that the most likely case of a country seeking nuclear weapons currently would be South Korea. And there's already been discussions in the news media that South Korea could one day give up its non-proliferation commitments and once again seek nuclear weapons in response to North Korea's growing nuclear arsenal.
To sum up, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the U.S. ability to prevent further spread of nuclear weapons?
I'm optimistic that the United States can continue to halt the spread of nuclear weapons, primarily because U.S. preponderant power provides huge value to its allies' security. Insofar as its allies want to maintain their relationship and their security commitments from the United States, the threat of withdrawing those commitments will be an effective lever for keeping those countries from acquiring nuclear weapons. And so we should see that insofar as the United States is willing to continue to use coercive pressure to keep its allies from acquiring nuclear weapons, it should continue to be able to do so.
Well, we're just about out of time, so it's good to end on that optimistic note. Thank you again, Gene, for being with us today.
Thank you, Sean.
Gene Gerzhoy is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs here at Harvard's Kennedy School. He's the author of Alliance Coercion and Nuclear Restraint, an article which was just published in the spring 2015 issue of International Security. Thank you again, Gene.
Thank you.